Hello, and welcome to another episode of Just Played, where I talk about tabletop RPGs I've recently participated in as either a player or a facilitator. I'm your host, Jim Crocker, and I've just played Old School Essentials, which is a retro clone of the original Blue Box D&D, basic D&D, from Necrotic Gnome. In this case, we're playing the classic module A1, Slave Pits of the Undercity, as part of playing through the whole A series of modules, those slaver modules A1 through 4. We played this game on the Gauntlet online gaming community, which you can find at gauntlet-rpg.com. So we played online via Zoom using Roll20 and some Google Sheets to keep track of other information. This was played Thursday evening, February 3rd, 2022, and our GM, or in this case DM, because this was a classic Dungeons and Dragons style game, was Mike Ferdinando, who I've played with a bunch and who actually, when he asked on the Gauntlet what classic D&D module should I run using OSE, I actually suggested the Slaver series here. So this series that we're playing right now, I guess I can accept either credit or blame depending on how the whole thing goes. But in this case, we've got characters that run the gamut from level 3 to level 4, depending on how many XP we have, because in that classic D&D setup, not everybody levels up at exactly the same speed. So I am Zalalaz the Sporadic, level 3 human magic user. We've also got Baroon the Dwarf, because again, in these OSE games, Dwarf is a class, Elf is a class. So we've got Baroon the Dwarf, Clintock Stump Jumper, a halfling rogue, Calf the Fighter, and Topaz the Acrobat. Actually, I think it's worth mentioning that Clintock is not just a rogue, but I think he's got a level of cleric there too to give him a little extra healing and stuff like that. So we've already got the multi-class going on, even just at level 3. When we started the game, we had just discovered the hideout of one of the slaver bosses. We're 3 or 4 sessions in at this point from where we started. And this guy is a scary-looking dude with a couple of pet guard drakes and a retinue of orc guards, all in a big central chamber that's in the heart of these sewers that we've been exploring under the city here, hence Slave Pits of the Undercity. He was actually doing paperwork when we got there. He had a desk laid out and ledgers and stuff like this and was writing in them. The orcs all looked bored. So we opened this session with our planning to ambush this guy because we had ended up last time discovering him. We're kind of hidden away in a little secret back entrance to this place, and we're just looking down on him, and there he is, and we can just take him out. And so we started to make our plans for that. So after some back and forth, we decide that our rogue striking by surprise, followed by everyone else charging in, was the way to go. I was still under the effects of a potion of levitation that I had quaffed last session. So it was my job to head to the other side of the chamber up in the rafters where no one could see me and somehow try to find a way to deal with some of those orcs. The orc guards, there are 10 of them or something like that. Way too many for us to kind of take on in a stand-up fight with just 4 or 5 of us. So our rogue sneaks up on the guy and strikes from the shadows, but he notices him at the last second, and then the big fight just breaks out, just straight up old school D&D melee combat. As I am floating over the fray as it gets going, I drop a bottle of sticky glue we picked up earlier. It's the sap from this carnivorous plant that we had killed. And that ties up some of the orcs who are charging over to reinforce their boss. They get stuck in it, kind of pile up on each other. A little bit of a, comic moment. But the bottom line is that it means they can't get in there to fight because they're all stuck on this narrow platform trying to reach him. I come down the stairs from the other side and cast Charm Person on one of the orcs and then holler at him that there's a slave revolt going on and he's needed with his crew at the slave pens. Fortunately, I speak Orcish. I'm the only one in the party that can. And so half of them follow that guy and rush up out the other door to help quell this non-existent slave rebellion. I go up the stairs, cast Hold Portal on the door behind them, and that keeps them out for a while. Once they're obviously going to figure out that there's nothing going on, we want to make it so that it's not easy for them to get back in and get into the fight. So as all this is going on, our fighters have been wearing down the boss, and finally our dwarf gladiator does a showy finishing move and just obliterates this guy. His 2 lizards still have some fight left in them, but we just throw a bunch of rations at them, and they finally calm down and lay off of us and just, start tearing into the jerky or whatever it is we fed them. The remaining orcs who have, by this point have kind of extricated themselves and realized that something, bad is happening, aren't sure what to do. So I just toss some bags of gold at them to keep them quiet and out of our way. Seeing as their boss is dead, they readily agree and sort of stand off to the side while we go through the boss's paperwork and his gear. He's got some good treasure, jewelry, couple of magic items, a ring of protection. But the most important thing he's got is a map, which of course points the way to a secret stockade where these jerks are keeping their prisoners, which is to say it's the route to A2, Secret of the Slaver's Stockade, the next module in the series. So we're divvying up the loot and feeling very smug when a loud banging on the door draws my attention. So I go up there and open the little murder hole, the little slidey, speakeasy hole, to see a very angry noble with a wizard of his own and the guards we sent packing. "We're negotiating with your boss right now. Go away," I say authoritatively. "That's strange because I'm his boss. Send him out now," says the angry noble. So I yell, "Run!" and we flee pell-mell back through the sewers as the door behind us explodes from a knock spell. We drop some flaming oil behind us to discourage pursuit through the narrow tunnels that we got into the place and managed to find a stairway back up to the surface and flee the scene to report back to our merchant prince bosses on the intel that we've gathered and count up our gold and divvy out the treasure and see who gets which magic items. So in this case, we ended having killed one of the slaver higher-ups. We leveled up and we're moving on to the next leg of our mission, which in this case is, like I said, A2, Secret of the Slaver's Stockade. So basically, we're in a chapter break right now. My favorite moment from one of the other players was the player who's portraying our dwarven gladiator decided at one point in the middle of the fight, after he had taken a bunch of hits, that he needed to roll a wisdom check to see if he kept fighting, even though the smart thing would have been to back off, let some other people take the hits and get healed. So he rolled it, and he failed, and nearly got killed in the process as he kept fighting. But we did manage to get him some healing in time for him to deliver the finishing move to the slaver boss, that showy gladiator move that I described. He kind of paused for a moment to look to the crowd and then forgetting that there wasn't one there. It was pretty cool. It was fun to see him just cede the direction of the story to the dice like that as a player. Sometimes that kind of thing can get a little too random for my tastes. Like if it's a player just not wanting to make a decision and just turning to the dice whenever they have to. But in this case, it really felt appropriate because that player had a really neat narrative idea about his character was half out of control with battle rage after being chained to a wall for a while by the slavers. And in that case, it just worked great. It was really fun. And the way that he role-played the kind of indecision before the dice kind of kicked in was really neat. My favorite moment from our DM, yes, I usually say GM, but in this case, a DM, Mike's portrayal of the big boss slaver noble was just spot on. He sounded annoyed, vindictive, and he couldn't help but bark some threats at us. Instead of just coming through the door straight away, he could have just blown the door in and caught us all unawares, but he had to grandstand. So we only heard 3 or 4 lines out of this guy, but we all agree that we hate him. And we are going to go out of our way to see that he dies when we run into him again, which we're confident we will. So great role-playing by Mike, a character we only saw for a couple of seconds, and we've all got a mat on for him. So that was really well done, the way that he, like I said, he could have just blown the door in and turned it into another fight, but he had him pose. And so now we really can't stand that guy. I love it. Something about the game that I noticed, in this case, Old School Essentials, it's a pretty direct clone of the classic basic D&D rules set that it's inspired by. It's got a few tweaks to account for modern OSR schools of thought, and it's certainly slicker and more comprehensively laid out than those original works ever were. Nothing, mimeographed here. It's been really intriguing to play with them as written, but through the sensibility of all the story games that we've all absorbed. Mike especially is a veteran GM who's run the gamut of trad, OSR, and a lot of indie games. And it's been great fun to negotiate around the table when we're going to use that binary resolution of classic D&D and when we're going to sneak in some of the variable successes and fictional positioning that you get from indie games. The mix has so far produced this really joyful and fun game that gets at the emotional core of those classic dungeon crawls while giving us flexibility to do things like use spells in weird ways and apply our safety tools to the pretty problematic 1980 module that we're playing. I mean, that's another thing, is that this thing very much reads like it was conceived of in the 70s. And so bringing some of those modern safety tools to it is kind of essential to playing it if we're going to play it properly and ethically today in 2022. None of that stuff is text in the OSC rules, the old school essential rules, but they are robust enough to handle those imports while still holding their shape. It's that paradoxical thing where the mechanical limits, especially on me as a wizard with a very limited spell selection, push me to do more than just rely on spamming my best ability or repeatedly rolling my best move like I might in a PBTA game, even though it's, ostensibly more narrative. But it's neat because we're not just spending all our time wearing down the other guy's hit points, which is the rap that these F20 fantasy games can get. That's not to say that I'm not taking Fireball as soon as I can, just that it's cool to have been in a game where Charm Person was a lot more useful when we got in trouble than, a handful of magic missiles would have been. But I definitely anticipate I'll have plenty more opportunities to be creative like that. I'm having great fun with this series and really looking forward to playing through the other modules. So that's it for this week. You can follow me on Twitter at JimLikesGames, which is also the name of my YouTube channel, where I've compiled hundreds of hours of actual play tabletop RPG videos. You can purchase game stuff I've written at my itch.io page under Jim Likes Games, just like it sounds, and look for me at conventions working with my friends at Indie Press Revolution. And of course, you can listen for me on other shows in the Curmudgeons and Dragons family of gaming podcasts. If you like what I'm doing here, please rate and review the show and tell your other gamer friends where to find it and what it's about. This episode, I wrote it and voiced it. It's produced by Jason Portizo. That's it for this week, so if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go play another game.
Thank you for listening to Curmudgeons and Dragons. Please share this with your favorite adventurers. Leave a review on Apple and follow us on social media. All links can be found at curmudgeonsanddragons.com. Practice safe adventuring, my friends.